Severe drought conditions have impacted area farmers not only during the growing season, but now during the fall harvest as well. And as the harvest unfolds, we're starting to get some data that really shows how the weather has played a role in the financial impact on area farmers. We're going to be talking about crop yields in particular, and also the quality of the crops, in particular the corn and the soybeans here in the Buckeye State and much of the Corn Belt region that has suffered the impacts of the drought. So let's break down the data and the weather impact that we are tracking, and that mainly has to do with the drought that has really pervaded all of the month of September and into the start of the month of October as well. Severe drought has played a role in the fall harvest, and latest data coming in from the U.S. Department of Agriculture helps shed some light on the magnitude of that impact. The impact most significant in terms of the crop quality, which has been notably lower than in previous years. We're going to be comparing that not only to 2023, but also to the average and just how far below normal we are in terms of this year's harvest. Now, we are starting to see a bit of an earlier start to the fall harvest than usual, and across the Buckeye State, approximately 92% of all corn has reached or exceeded the mature stage. That is significantly ahead of last year, and we were at around 80% through the middle of October. Based on the latest data from the USDA, around 34% of Ohio corn has been harvested so far. Compared to a normal year, that is considerably higher. In fact, almost about double what you'd expect. Typically around 18% of the corn has been harvested through the middle of the month. What about the soybeans in the area? Those have also been ahead of schedule, typically about 43% harvested through today's date, and we have seen 62% harvested thus far. Dry weather is going to provide good weather for the harvest, but unfortunately, the extremely dry weather during the growing season has had some adverse effects. The harvest is ahead of schedule, but the quality of the crops thus far has been far lower than usual. Now, comparing the fall harvest progress to where we were last year, you'll notice considerably higher in terms of how swiftly the corn is getting harvested. The percent of corn that's reached that mature stage is now at a 92%, and that's the yellow line. The red line shows you a normal year. Typically through the middle of the month of October, only at around an 80%, and it takes a couple more weeks before we pass that 90% threshold, with the fall harvest extending into the end of October and even into the start of November. So we are ahead of schedule. However, crop quality has been significantly lower than usually reported. In terms of corn, not looking at a ton that has been measured as excellent. Only 3% of corn reaches that qualification. 37% in the good territory, 41% fair, and that really is a sign of the impacts of the drought. 12% of corn is classified as poor, and 7% in Ohio, very poor. Compared to where we were last year, these numbers are considerably worse. As of the middle of October last year, around 60 to 70% of corn was labeled as good. So we are seeing a much lower end of the spectrum there in terms of crop quality thus far. Looking at 2023 versus 2024, this chart is really telling. You'll notice the yellow color is this year and the red color, that is last year, 2023. A lot of that corn through this point last year was classified as good. In fact, around 70% met that standard. This year, that is well below 50%, and excellent, a very small minority of the corn harvest so far. The last couple of years, we really didn't have much corn harvest that was considered poor or very poor. However, unfortunately, that standard has been rising over the course of this year. Now, what about the area soybeans? A lot of farmers have reported what is known as pod shatter. Essentially, the very low moisture content reduces yield, and that low moisture content not only experienced in the topsoil, but also in the subsoil deep down below the top layer of soil, and that is a result of consistent weeks and weeks of below average rainfall that has adversely affected the soybean crop. Thus far, 8% of the soybeans harvested in Ohio have been classified as very poor, and a whopping 16% called poor. 37% fair, only 36% good, and very little of the soybean crop has been marked as excellent. Similar numbers comparing to last year, and we really saw things skewed in the other direction in 2023. This chart compares 2023 to 2024. Once again, this year is yellow, last year is red. You can see we had over 50% of last year's soybeans that were classified as good, and a significant amount as excellent as well. That has been a small minority of the soybean harvest this year so far, with less than 50% at good and a higher number at fair than at good. And similar to last year, that poor and very poor category seems to be growing this year as a result of the prevailing severe drought conditions. So what will farmers face in the 10-day forecast? If there's any bit of good news with that dry weather, it's that it will provide the opportunity to harvest those crops rain-free without any worries of wet fields. Unfortunately, during the growing season, the severe and extreme drought was not good news, but at least we will have dry farm fields over the next week, if not 2 weeks as well. The latest drought monitor information consistently still shows, mainly along and west of I-75, severe drought that has prevailed, and some parts of Fulton County and areas west of Toledo, stretching back towards Williams, Defiance, and Henry counties, have been upgraded to an extreme drought, and that is where the rainfall deficit is the most notable. Over the entire course of September, we only got around 3/4 of an inch of rainfall at Toledo Express Airport, and that makes it one of the top 10 least rainy Septembers on record. Further to the east, Erie and Huron counties have seen a bit more rain, although they are still marked as abnormally dry. Severe drought for the entirety of the Toledo Metro, and looking southwest along the Route 23 corridor towards Fort Wayne, that is where rainfall is the most imminently needed. An extreme drought is expected to continue, and we're looking at extreme drought in Fulton County, including Wauseon, and that stretches back north to the city of Napoleon and into Williams County as well, where rainfall has been especially below average. Across the Toledo Metro, the rainfall deficit continuing, with severe drought that has been markedly continuing over the last month or so. We're going to continue to keep an eye on the impacts on the fall harvest, because based on the data we're seeing right now, things not looking great for area farmers, and there are inevitably going to be some financial impacts due to this severe drought. We'll continue to update you in the Climate Friday newsletter. If you're not already subscribed, WTOL.com/email. We'll have the latest information each and every week. See you next Friday.